Part 20. He really couldn't watch the royal bloodline disappear, so he broke his last bottom line. The imperial doctor soon rushed over, and under Xiao Beiji's intervention, the chief eunuch of the Qingliang Palace had to temporarily make a vacant room for the imperial doctor to treat the two children's injuries. Both children have different degrees of internal injuries. And I want to know that the Sha Dongming brothers will not show mercy. Fortunately, there was no fatal injury in the end, after the imperial doctor prescribed the prescription. Xiao Beiji called two palace maids and asked them to take care of the two children first, and then went to negotiate with Wei Chongzai, and then took Pu Qiutai to the front palace. Master Pu. The slave has a saying, I don't know if I should say it or not. Seeing Pu Qiutai turning his head back frequently, his eyes were full of worry, Xiao Beiji finally spoke. He knew that the emperor had already felt guilty about the man in front of him, and the words of persecution could no longer be spoken, so only himself, a servant, shared the worries for the master. Pu Qiutai didn't speak, and Xiao Beiji also knew that his heart was full of anger and worry now. So, he said to himself, adults are extremely smart. I don't think you don't know the emperor's intentions, that's right. These royal families are the most cruel, let alone treat the former royal family. These two children are in the harem. Even if they don't fall into the hands of Wei Chongzai and fall into the hands of others, they can't live to grow up. Pu Qiutai glanced at Xiao Beiji in surprise. But he didn't expect him to be blunt talking with himself. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Yes. I know, so I thought, instead of living so miserable, those two children should let them and their parents spend a day together and then die, the emperor. No matter how cruel the emperor is, he is always human, I think. He will not even refuse to agree to this request. Right? Xiao Beiji glanced at Pu Qiutai, and already knew what this person was thinking in his heart, so he couldn't help coughing, and said lightly, Master Pu still wants to ask the emperor for mercy? Forgive the servant bluntly, the emperor is indifferent by nature, but since he was fortunate to be an adult, he has already made many exceptions for adults. Pu Qiutai's body was shocked, and Xiao Beiji's words were obvious. The emperor made an exception for you to retreat again and again. Do you think he will be gracious to you this time? It's about the emperor's reputation and the remnants of the previous dynasty. How can it be so cheap? That. So, what to do? Don't. Do you really want these two children to be brutalized to death? Pu Qiutai stood still, looked blankly ahead, and only felt that there was a burst of blackness in front of him. Master Pu. Xiao Beiji was startled, and hurriedly said, if Master Pu can trust the slave, I have an idea here. What's the idea? Just like a drowning man grabbing a straw. Pu Qiutai turned around, his eyes were full of hope, and he hurriedly said, Eunuch Pei, say it quickly, as long as I can save these two children, The oil pot on the knife mountain is also willing. Hey, who dares to let you go up the knife mountain and go down to the oil pot? Xiao Beiji coughed, then looked around, and then whispered. The emperor once said that he wanted Master Pu to enter the palace to accompany him, but considering that Master Pu has a strong temperament and is not in good health, he has never made such a request again. Now these two children are obviously not alive in the harem, but if Master Pu enters the palace and you raise these two children, won't the problem be solved? Entering the palace. Pu Qiutai looked at Xiao Beiji blankly, muttered in disbelief and repeated, and then he shook his head suddenly. No way, I said. There is no way I can enter the palace. It is impossible to. Xiao Beiji shook his head and smiled lightly. What? In the eyes of adults, entering the palace is even more terrible than going up and down the knife mountain? Let's go. The servant just came up with such an idea. Whether to adopt it or not, it doesn't depend on the adult. The emperor regards adults as treasures, and is reluctant to persecute them. Where does the servant dare to dictate to them? But in this way, the two brothers and sisters. What else don't adults know? There are many ways to rectify people in the harem, and if the mother wants you to die, you can't live. But if you want to live, you can't die easily. Moreover, the emperor is busy with government affairs, so I'm afraid he doesn't have time to pay attention to these little things. Of course, Xia Linxuan won't pay attention to it. This is the result he wants. Why should he bother? Pu Qiutai knows this very well, and because he is clear, his heart is full of unprecedented contradictions. Just a few months ago, he also told Xia Linxuan that not entering the palace was his last bottom line, and if he forced himself to enter the palace, even his relatives and elders would not want to blackmail him. However, now, in the face of the last bit of blood of the Qing dynasty's royal family, in the face of the disappointed homeland and the unreported kindness of the acquaintance, he said toughly. But his heart was already shaken. He really couldn't watch the royal bloodline disappear, not to mention that Shanyan and Mingfang were just two innocent children. Perhaps his toughness is just a disguise? If the emperor really used his father, fellow villagers and parents to coerce, would he really rather die than compromise? Pu Qiutai didn't know. Because of Shanyan and Mingfang, he found for the first time, perhaps he was even weaker and incompetent than he imagined. This road seems to have no end, but it seems to be very short. Pu Qiutai doesn't know what kind of mood he is in to finish it, and Xiao Beiji doesn't speak again. However, when he arrived outside the heart cultivation palace, looking at the white marble road leading to the steps, and looking at the white marble steps that represented the majesty and power of the royal family, his hands couldn't help but clench into fists. Xia Linxuan had already come back from imperial study, and was sitting on a chair in the outer room of the heart cultivation palace at this time, leisurely sipping tea. When he saw Xiao Beiji and Pu Qiutai coming back, he raised his eyes, smiled and asked, "How is it? See those two children?" Pu Qiutai looked at the young and handsome face calmly. Even if the emperor had a smile on his face, he was not angry and arrogant. He only felt that his body was hot and cold, and he wanted to rush up and strangle Xia Linxuan desperately. Or he wanted to kneel down then cry and beg him to let go of the Zhu family's bloodline. But the remaining shred of reason told him that he couldn't move, so he just stood there motionless. Huh? What happened to Qiutai? Xia Linxuan stood up from his seat and looked at Pu Qiutai with some suspicion. Isn't it 20 boards? They can't stand it. There was a sweet smell surging in his throat, and Pu Qiutai was reluctant to show weakness on weekdays, but whenever there was such a sign, he would desperately swallow that mouthful of blood. However, this time, he didn't want to swallow blood and tears at all, so when Xia Linxuan walked in front of him, he moved his lips, and before he could speak, a mouthful of blood spurted out. "Qiutai!" Xia Linxuan shouted and was shocked to hold Pu Qiutai. He saw Pu Qiutai laughing miserably, and muttered, "Your Majesty." "That's good. The means." Before the words fell, he passed out. "Pass on the imperial doctor." Xia Linxuan's roar was like thunder rolling in the sky, which immediately made the eunuchs and palace maids panic. While carrying Pu Qiutai into the inner room, he said sharply to Xiao Beiji, "What happened? You tell me the truth." After Xiao Beiji told the truth about the situation in the Qingliang palace, Xia Linxuan's expression had returned to calm, and only a trace of anger remained in his eyes. "Fool! She almost ruined my big thing." Xia Linxuan flicked his sleeves fiercely. The two children of the Zhu family are the only bargaining chips for Qiutai to enter the palace. He obviously feels that he has hinted in enough detail. Who knows that the smart woman in ice and snow on weekdays is so stupid at this time that she almost ruined his whole plan. In a fit of anger, he wanted to reduce Wei Changzai to agree. But he heard Xiao Beiji say in a low voice, "Your Majesty, Wei Changzai is also the mother of the second prince. If this is too low, I am afraid it will be." To the second prince? Xia Linxuan glanced at Xiao Beiji. Although he was displeased, he had to admit that what his henchman eunuch said made sense, so he snorted coldly, brushed his sleeves and said, "In this case, this time I will forget it first, but you want to find a way to pass my displeasure over. Those two children are not unable to toss, but let her give me a little leisure." Xiao Beiji hurriedly took the order out. Here, Xia Linxuan refocused his attention on Pu Qiutai, stretched out his hand and gently stroked his tender face. Because there has been too much torment and suffering for most of the year, there has never been a happy smile on Pu Qiutai's face. And fortunately it is well nourished, otherwise this face may be more than 10 years old. Sighing, Xia Linxuan's eyes were no longer cold and irritable when he mentioned the two children, full of tenderness. After a while, he stood up and walked to the outer hall and said to Lu Wu, "Isn't the tonic stewed in the small kitchen good? You're careful." Lu Wu agreed and went out. After a while, he heard a faint moan from inside. Xia Linxuan hurriedly turned around from the window, and walked quickly to Pu Qiutai's bed, but saw him with his eyes open. His eyes were blank as if he was not right for himself, and it took a long time for the blurred eyes to slowly clear up. At this time, Lu Wu and the two palace maids also brought the rock sugar lotus seed bird's nest that had just been made in the small kitchen, and said softly, "Your Majesty, there is still an hour before dark. Let Master Pu eat this mat to make up for it, and a few soups in the kitchen will be stewed again, just for dinner." Xia Linxuan nodded, took the delicate white porcelain bowl from Lu Wu's hand, and naturally scooped up a spoonful of rock sugar lotus seed bird's nest with a spoon, and blew it carefully on the side of his mouth before feeding it into Pu Qiutai's mouth. Regardless of the eyes of the palace maids beside him who almost broke out of their sockets, Pu Qiutai drank the bird's nest silently. He would never be so obedient in the past. He always had to be forced and coaxed, and he would reluctantly finish the tonic with his own hands. Xia Linxuan, who was thinking like this, couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly, glanced at his beloved in surprise, but didn't say anything, until a bowl of bird's nest was fed. He smiled faintly. "Qiutai is very obedient today." Pu Qiutai lowered his eyes. This angle made his beautiful eyelashes meet Xia Linxuan's eyes again. His Majesty Emperor couldn't help but reach out and brush over the long eyelashes and said with a low smile, "I love Qiutai's eyes the most, especially these 2 rows of eyelashes. When I see them, they are so cute." If the emperor can give a share of his tenderness to his ministers to Shanyan and Mingfang, they will not have today's miserable end. Pu Qiutai finally raised his eyes, looked at Xia Linxuan with a sigh, and muttered, "The emperor is also a father. How can you bear it? To 2 children." Xia Linxuan looked away and said indifferently, "I am a ruthless emperor. Didn't Qiutai always think that I was a faint tyrant in your heart? What's more, those are the 2 bloodlines of the royal family of the old dynasty. Qiutai thinks I should have compassion for them? It seems that when the Qing dynasty overthrew the Chong dynasty, your Qing Taizu buried all the royal family of the Chong dynasty alive. Right?" Pu Qiutai was stunned and was speechless by Xia Linxuan. As the saying goes, once a son of heaven and a courtier, the conflict between the royal family and the court is still life and death. Not to mention the 2 feuding regimes. He sighed for a long time before he said, "If the emperor must put Shanyan and Mingfang to death, why not just do it? Why let them suffer so much?" Xia Linxuan smiled, turned his head and looked at him with interest. Everyone thinks that I care about my reputation, so I use a soft knife to kill people. Could it be that Qiutai thinks so too? Pu Qiutai's body suddenly trembled. Xia Linxuan's meaning is very clear. I am a faint monarch and a tyrant. What reputation do I need to cherish? If it weren't for some reason, don't say that these two remnants of the previous dynasty, even Zhu Mingtang and others, would have been killed a long time ago. And some of the reasons are naturally not asked. For a moment, Pu Qiutai couldn't help but be in a trance. He looked up at Xia Linxuan and secretly said that the emperor had really taken great pains to persecute him, first his parents and relatives, then his fellow villagers. And now even the prince of the previous dynasty has moved out. He heard the prince say that their family originally lived in seclusion in the countryside, but suddenly one day, they were found by the Royal Dark Guard and captured in Beijing, so they also suffered from unjustified disasters? If it weren't for the emperor trying to force him, would their family have been able to spend the rest of their lives in the countryside in peace? It's just that this persecution really likes you and wants to drive with you day and night? Or is it a kind of imperial conquest? Didn't you say that you would not enter the palace by swearing? I put the chips heavier, to see if you can enter the palace? How can the king of a country be so amorous? Pu Qiutai smiled, shook his head and expelled the unrealistic fantasies in his mind. Anyway, whether he really likes it or wants to conquer it, he has no way out, right? Since he vomited blood and fell into a coma in front of Xia Linxuan just now, he had actually made a choice in his heart. Your Majesty, if the minister enters the palace, can 2 children be given to a minister to raise? The fist was clenched tightly, but it was finally released again. Pu Qiutai took a deep breath, exhaled again, and then raised his eyes and looked at Xia Linxuan calmly. He wants to protect those 2 children. He must not watch the blood of the Daqing royal family disappear like this. Okay. Pu Qiutai's surprise. Xia Linxuan replied very happily. And then he looked at Pu Qiutai with a smile, and said word by word, I will not kill them, but whether they can grow up safely depends on Qiutai's ability to protect them. What kind of place the harem is, you should know it in your heart. I won't be so despicable as to promise you that I will do it to those 2 children. However, if a concubine makes a move, once the consequences are caused, I will not punish them for the remnants of the 2 previous dynasties. Qiutai, you understand what I mean, right? Minister. Got it. Pu Qiutai lowered his eyes again. Although his voice was soft, the firm and resolute meaning in it made Xia Linxuan's heart tremble. Don't be afraid. I will protect you. Holding Pu Qiutai's hand, feeling that the person he liked was trembling slightly, Xia Linxuan sighed softly, hugged Pu Qiutai into his arms, and hugged him so tightly. Heaven news carrier, the Emperor Edict said, Hanlin Academy's minister Pu Qiutai, beautiful and good-looking. Very much in line with my intentions. Seeing eunuch Zhang reading out the holy decree loudly a few steps away, Pu Qiutai's mind couldn't help but fly away. He remembered that at this time a year ago, he was still at home, lamenting the ruddy courtyard that the rivers and mountains of his homeland no longer existed, but in a blink of an eye, he was already about to become the male favorite of the king of the new dynasty. He knew that the world was unpredictable, but it was unpredictable to this point. And he really doubted whether God would torture him in such a cruel way because he was not martyred that day. Live up to the plum tree in the old garden, the south branch is open, and the north branch is cold. In this life and this life, is it possible for me to return to that small courtyard? I'm afraid I won't see those dozen plum trees again, right? From then on, he could only enjoy the plum trees in the imperial garden, and those plum trees must have bloomed warmly and vigorously, just like the high-spirited Xia Linxuan in the world. But there would no longer be the cold and sparse plum trees in the old garden. Master Pu, take the order. Eunuch Zhang's words woke Pu Qiutai from his memories. And he felt some wetness on his face. He raised his hand to wipe it, stretched out his hand to receive the holy decree as heavy as mountain, and then knocked his head down. Minister. Thanksgiving. Eunuch Zhang sighed. Farong had already supported Pu Qiutai up, and asked Eunuch Zhang, "Did the emperor say when the young master will enter the palace?" Eunuch Zhang said with a smile, "The emperor said, this date Lord Pu will set it himself. If you feel uncomfortable, you can rest in this Hanlin pavilion for a few days, but it's just." He didn't wait for him to finish speaking. He saw Pu Qiutai shaking his head and said categorically, "No need. I will enter the palace today." Huh? Eunuch Zhang stayed there, and Honglian hurriedly said, "Young master, oh no, mother, will it be too early to enter the palace today? We haven't cleaned it up yet." When Eunuch Zhang heard this, he hurriedly smiled and said, "Honglian girl, don't worry, you can clean up here slowly," the emperor said. "Most of the things in this pavilion are fine products in the treasury, except for the ones that mother brought to Yunhai Palace, all the others must be recovered. The pavilion will also be restored to its original layout." As soon as I heard Eunuch Zhang say this, except for Pu Qiutai, everyone else was stunned, and Honglian said, "It's just a matter of recovering the treasury, and you have to. Do you want to revert to the old layout? This has opened up 3 rooms. Is it possible to rebuild the wall and divide it into 3 rooms?" Eunuch Zhang smiled. "That's what I mean when I want to come to the emperor." After he finished speaking, he clapped his fists and led the other little eunuchs back to the palace to reply to the decree. Pu Qiutai sat in the courtyard, just waiting for the Honglian and hibiscus to finish cleaning up, and then immediately entered the palace. Suddenly, seeing Shuangxi, he sighed, beckoned him over, and said softly, "Shuangxi, I'm going to enter the palace." Before he finished speaking, he was already rolling down tears. He hurriedly turned his head and wiped away his tears, before he turned back and forced a calm. Said, "You are a man, you can't enter the palace, go back to your hometown in the south. And tell my father and mother when you go back, just say that I am not filial, and I am afraid that I will not have the opportunity to serve under their knees in the future. My lord, the slave is to be a eunuch, and I want to enter the palace with you, so that the slave doesn't want to worry about you." Shuangxi wiped his tears, suddenly knelt in front of Pu Qiutai, and said bitterly, "My lord, you just agreed to the servant. I heard that the harem is dark, and the slave is really afraid that you will be calculated." Confused, Pu Qiutai snorted. His eyebrows were about to stand up. He stood up, and said sharply to Shuangxi, "You have followed me since you were a child. Is the final ending to be a eunuch? Where have you put me, your master? I was forced to enter the palace. You should be glad that you can escape this catastrophe, and you still want to arch into it? Are you trying to piss me off? The harem is dark. But if they have the means to calculate me, do you think you can avoid it? What are you going to do to help me? Maybe it will become my weakness and drag me down when the time comes. You wait and pack up immediately, and before I enter the palace, let you go back to my hometown in the south, and serve the second elder for me in the future. Which is your loyalty to me?" Shuangxi cried bitterly, only saying that he was not afraid of being a eunuch, and he would definitely enter the palace with Pu Qiutai. The master and servant were inseparable here, when they saw Yulan coming over, and said with a soft smile, "Shuangxi, you honestly listened to mother's words, go back and do your filial piety for him." Eunuch, is that easy to do? With us by the young master's side, we will not let him suffer a loss. What are you afraid of? Shuangxi has always been a little afraid of these clever palace maids. Since these women came, he, the only little guy around the adult, has been seriously marginalized. At this time, listening to Yulan say this, although he was not convinced, but after all, he did not dare to raise his voice, and said, "If the eunuch is not good, it is not easy to do. As long as I can be by the young master's side, I let it go." "You're a fool." Yulan shook her head and said to Pu Qiutai, "Mother, Sister Farong asked you to go in and see if there is anything else you want to bring into the palace?" The slaves and maids here came to persuade him to let him return to the south obediently, get married and have children in the future, and live in peace. Pu Qiutai looked at Shuangxi indignant but didn't dare to show it, nodded and returned to the house. He saw Farong standing by the door, and said with a smile, "Shuangxi is afraid of us but not mother, because what? It's not that the mother is soft-hearted, and he is no big or small. So that he regards you as a brother rather than a master. Listen to my words, enter the palace, mother can't be so soft-hearted anymore." Pu Qiutai smiled bitterly. "Can you not call mother? It's awkward to listen to. Can you still call me a young master like before?" Farong was silent for a moment, sighed and shook her head. "Mother, the slave knows your thoughts, but what kind of place the harem is, you probably know it in your heart. If you enter the palace now, it will be the target of everyone. Otherwise, why would the emperor make you a concubine? Just enter the palace to be able to seal the concubine. This is also the number one in our famous dynasty, in terms of harem concubines. The emperor has never made an exception, and now he is making an exception for you. Isn't he looking forward to being able to better protect you? The problem of calling is not big or small. But it is not small, once someone. Okay, needless to say, I see." Pu Qiutai sighed. He knew that Farong was for his own good, but what made him wonder was, did the emperor make me a concubine? How did I not know? Farong coughed, thinking to herself, "Mother, what the holy decree said is clear, and you are named a virtuous concubine. You yourself didn't hear it at that time, and you still ask me at this time?" But of course, she couldn't say this, so she nodded and smiled. "Yes, the emperor has made the lord to concubine Wenxian. In this harem, except for the queen and concubine Luo, concubine Yan, you have the highest position." "Concubine Luo, concubine Yan?" Pu Qiutai couldn't help but think of the two charming and dignified women in the Qingliang palace. Thinking of the means by which they were going to put themselves to death when they talked and laughed, and couldn't help but chuckle in his heart. Yes, he is not afraid of death, and even longs to die, but now he is no longer his own. He wants to protect the two children under his wings. The premise is that he must be strong enough. Only in this way will his wings have the strength to protect Shanyan and Mingfang. What Xia Linxuan said to himself before, he wanted him to protect the two children by his own strength. He was afraid that he would react negatively after entering the palace, so that he would be injured or killed, so he put such a shackle on him. If it weren't for the fact that the last time the adults incident happened in the Qingliang palace, Wei Chongzai should have been able to seal the concubine. Although her power is low, but she is charming and affectionate, and she is also favored by the emperor, and she gave birth to a second prince, only because she was young and ignorant before. And she was arrogant to bump into the queen's mother, so she has always been just a noblewoman, but she didn't expect to see that she was finally going to be promoted, but it was a carelessness. And she fell down heavily. When Farong said this, she didn't sigh much, she just wanted to tell Pu Qiutai, "The harem is very cruel, the Holy Family is very important. Although the queen is sick and has no grace, she must not take her edge lightly." Pu Qiutai was because of what happened to Shanyan and Mingfang. And he already had a problem with that Wei Chongzai in his heart, and he didn't have any sympathy for the unjustified disaster she suffered.